She was just a rookie nurse, quiet and invisible. Her boss, the celebrated chief surgeon, decided she was disposable. He tried to fire her in the middle of a crisis, but he made one mistake. He did it in front of the wrong man. A man who recognized a ghost from a world of shadows and steel. Now, let me take you inside St. Jude's Metropolitan Hospital on the day everything changed. The air in St. Jude's had a taste. It was a sterile cocktail of bleach, latex, and the faint metallic tang of human suffering. Alara Vance had learned to breathe it in without tasting it, to move through it as if it were her natural element. For 6 months, she had been a ghost in blue scrubs, a fixture of the surgical recovery ward, then the emergency room. Her movements were economical, her presence muted. She did the work. She kept her head down. She clocked in, and she clocked out. Her invisibility was a shield. It was a carefully constructed fortress against a past she had buried under 6 feet of concrete and a new identity. Here, she was not call sign Spectre. She was not the senior combat medic of a Tier 1 unit whose name was spoken only in whispers. Here, she was Nurse Vance, a rookie. Someone you could overlook, dismiss, or, in the case of Dr. Alistair Finch, openly despise. Dr. Finch was the chief of surgery, and he moved through the halls of St. Jude's not like a healer, but like a king surveying his domain. His suits were immaculate, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his voice a rich baritone that could soothe a donor's wife or flay a resident in a single, condescending sentence. He smiled like a man of God and held the power of life and death in hands that were manicured weekly, and he did not like Alara Vance. He never said it directly. He was too clever for that. Instead, it was in the way his eyes, the color of a winter sky, would slide past her as if she were a piece of furniture. It was in the way he would recheck her charting, his pen hovering over her neat script as if expecting to find a fatal error. It was in the small, deliberate humiliations. "Nurse," he'd call out, not bothering with her name, his voice echoing in the quiet of the nurse's station. "Coffee, black. And for God's sake, make sure the cup is actually clean this time." The other nurses would flinch, their eyes darting to Alara with a mixture of pity and relief that it was not them. Alara would simply nod, her face a placid mask. "Yes, doctor." She would fetch the coffee. She would ensure the cup was spotless. She would place it on his desk without a sound and retreat back into the comforting shadows of her duties. Each time, it was a small test of her resolve. Each time she passed by swallowing the bitter taste of submission and reminding herself of the purpose of this life. Anonymity, peace, atonement. This morning was no different. The day began with the familiar hum of hospital life, the rhythmic beeping of monitors, the soft squeak of rubber-soled shoes on polished linoleum. Alara was in the ER, her preferred territory. It was the closest thing to the controlled chaos she had once known. Here, decisions were fast, and results were immediate. You either stabilized the patient, or you did not. There was a purity to it. She was organizing a crash cart, her movements a fluid, practiced ballet of efficiency. Every vial, every syringe, every roll of gauze had its place. An organized cart was a saved life. It was a mantra from her other life, one that had stubbornly followed her here. "Vance!" The voice was a whip crack. Alara's shoulders tensed for a fraction of a second, an internal switch being flipped before she consciously relaxed it. She turned slowly. Dr. Finch stood behind her, his arms crossed, a sneer playing on his lips. He was flanked by 2 surgical residents who looked like nervous acolytes. "You do realize this is an emergency cart, not your personal dollhouse, correct?" Finch said, his voice dripping with disdain. He gestured vaguely at the perfectly ordered drawers. "I'm sure it looks very pretty, but a crisis doesn't wait for you to finish your little organizational projects. Ilara's face remained neutral. An organized cart saves time, Doctor. Seconds matter. Finch chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. He looked at his residents. You hear that, gentlemen? Seconds matter. This is the profound wisdom our nursing staff has to offer. He turned his gaze back to Ilara, his eyes cold. Your job is to follow orders, nurse, not to reinvent procedures that have worked perfectly well since before you were born. Now, restock it the standard way and get back to actual work. The standard way was a mess. A jumble of supplies thrown into drawers, forcing a frantic search during a code. It was inefficient. It was dangerous. It was his way. Yes, doctor, she said. The words were ash in her mouth. He held her gaze for a moment longer, enjoying his dominance. He was a predator who fed on the quiet fear of his subordinates. He saw her placid expression not as control, but as weakness. He saw a target. See that you do, he said, before sweeping away, his white coat billowing behind him like a cape. Ilara stood perfectly still for a long moment, her knuckles white where she gripped the side of the cart. The residents scurried after their master, avoiding her eyes. She took a slow, deliberate breath, the way she'd been trained. In through the nose, hold for 4, out through the mouth. Detach. Observe. Control the internal environment before you attempt to control the external one. She closed the drawer she had been organizing. She would not undo her work. It was a small act of defiance, invisible to anyone but her. A quiet refusal to be broken. If there was a code on her shift, her cart would be ready. His ego was not worth a patient's life. She turned and walked back toward the main hub of the ER, the familiar weight of her isolation settling back over her shoulders. It was a lonely peace she had chosen. She just had to endure. She had to remember that the woman who could have snapped Dr. Finch's neck in under 3 seconds was dead and buried. Only Nurse Vance remained, and Nurse Vance was a ghost. The first sign of the change was a sound. It started as a distant, mournful cry that grew steadily into a chorus of screaming sirens. It was a sound every ER professional knew, a sound that tightened the muscles and quickened the pulse. 1 siren was an emergency. 2 was a problem. 3, 4, 5, that was a disaster. Ilara was checking the vitals of a man with chest pains when the charge nurse, a unflappable woman named Maria, shouted from the main desk. I just got a call from dispatch. Motorcade collision on the expressway. Multiple vehicles. Possible explosion. They're saying mass casualty. All hands on deck. ETA 2 minutes. The air in the ER crackled. The low hum of activity became a frantic buzz. Nurses and doctors began moving with urgent purpose, clearing bays, prepping triage stations. The controlled chaos Ilara thrived on was about to become pure, unadulterated hell. For a split second, the old training surfaced, the instinct to take command, to establish a perimeter, to direct flow, to turn the chaos into a structured response. She could see it in her mind's eye, a triage point here, a black tag zone there, a clear path for critical patients. She stamped it down. Not your place, not your role. You are a nurse. You follow. You assist. She moved to the main entrance with the other staff, her mind a cold, clear space amidst the rising panic. She grabbed a stack of triage tags, the simple green, yellow, red, and black slips of paper that would decide destinies. The first ambulance screamed to a halt at the bay doors, and they burst open. The scene was worse than imagined. It was not just a collision. The paramedics were shouting about a secondary device, an IED. This was not an accident. It was an attack. The first gurney carried a man in a torn black suit, his face a mask of blood, a shard of metal protruding from his shoulder. A security officer. The second held a woman in shock, her body peppered with shrapnel from a car window. Then another, and another. A river of broken bodies began to flow into the emergency room. The system, the carefully constructed process of a civilian hospital, began to buckle almost immediately. There were too many critical injuries, too many people screaming, too much blood. Alara saw a young resident freeze, his eyes wide as he looked at a patient with a catastrophic abdominal wound. He was paralyzed by the sheer horror of it. "Get me a line, now!" another doctor yelled, his voice strained. In this maelstrom, Dr. Finch appeared, his face grim but his authority absolute. "Listen to me," he boomed, his voice cutting through the noise. "Red tags to trauma 1 and 2, yellows to the overflow bays, greens to the waiting room. I want senior attendings on all criticals. Residents, you assist. Nurses, you follow their lead. Do not get in the way." His eyes swept the room and landed on Alara. For a moment, she thought he would give her an order, but instead, a look of profound irritation crossed his face, as if her very presence was an inconvenience. He pointed a finger at her. "Vance, you're on intake. Paperwork. Keep the names straight. Don't touch anyone." It was the ultimate dismissal. A trained medic, a nurse, relegated to clerical duties in the middle of a war zone while others struggled to save lives. It was a calculated insult, a public branding of her as useless. "Doctor, she started, her voice low and urgent. "You can do as you're told," he snapped, his face reddening. "Or you can get the hell out of my ER. Now move." Humiliation burned hot in her chest. She saw Maria, the charge nurse, give her a look of helpless apology. Alara nodded once, a sharp, clipped motion, and turned toward the intake desk. Head down. Do the work. Even if the work is meaningless. But the river of bodies did not stop. The flow became a flood. The 2 main trauma bays were instantly full. The overflow bays were swamped. Doctors were performing procedures in the hallways. The screams and the metallic smell of blood were overwhelming. The system had not just buckled, it had broken. From her useless post at the intake desk, Alara watched it happen. She saw a nurse struggle to insert an IV into a patient who was going into shock, her hands trembling. She saw a resident misread a triage tag, sending a critical patient to the yellow zone. She saw chaos winning. And then she saw the boy. He was maybe 7 or 8, pushed in on a gurney, conscious but deathly pale. A piece of rebar from the highway divider had gone clean through his thigh. The paramedic was trying to hold him still, but the boy was thrashing, his eyes wide with terror. He was bleeding out, fast. The gurney was jostled to the side of the hallway, lost in the shuffle of more dramatic, screaming adults. He was being overlooked. He was minutes from death. Something inside Alara broke. It was not a decision. It was an activation. The part of her she had tried to kill, the part that was forged in fire and blood, rose up and took control. The ghost was awake. She moved. She did not think. She did not ask permission. She abandoned the clipboard, which clattered to the floor, unheard in the din. She moved with a speed and purpose that was utterly alien to the shambling, quiet nurse everyone knew. She reached the boy's gurney in seconds. "I have him," she said to the overwhelmed paramedic, her voice calm and absolute. It was the voice of command. The paramedic, startled, simply nodded and let go. Alara's hands went to work. Her eyes scanned the injury, the blood flow, the boy's pallor, his respiratory rate. Her mind was a supercomputer processing data. Femoral artery is likely nicked, not severed. Shock is imminent. Distal pulse is weak. "Talk to me," she said to the boy, her voice softening just enough. "What's your name?" "Leo," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. Okay, Leo, I'm Ilara. I'm going to help you. I need you to be brave for me. Her hands were already moving, grabbing a package of hemostatic gauze from a nearby cart. She ripped it open with her teeth. It hurts, he cried. I know. It will for a little while longer. She began packing the gauze deep into the wound, working with a firm, practiced pressure that was brutal and life-saving. The boy screamed, a raw, piercing sound. I need a pressure dressing and a tourniquet, now, she called out to no one in particular. A flustered-looking nurse aide stared at her, frozen. Ilara's eyes snapped to her. Now! The aide jumped and fumbled for the supplies. Ilara ignored her and continued to apply pressure, her entire focus narrowed to the wound and the small life fading beneath her hands. She could feel the bleeding slowing. The aide returned with the supplies. Ilara took them without looking. She applied the pressure dressing with swift, efficient wraps. Then she took the tourniquet. She applied it high on the thigh, the textbook placement. She tightened the windlass, her movements sure and precise. She secured it, then took a permanent marker from her pocket. On the boy's forehead, she wrote a simple T and the time. 14:32. Standard procedure. But then she did something else. As she secured the strap of the windlass, she tied it off, not with a simple knot, but with a specific, complex series of loops and hitches. It was a knot designed to be tied with one hand, under fire, in the dark. A knot that would not slip, not even if it was soaked in blood. A knot that was taught in only one place in the world, the Advanced Medical Training Course for the 75th Ranger Regiment and its attached Special Operations units. It was a signature. She finished and looked up, her eyes already scanning for the next critical patient, the next fire to put out. And her gaze fell upon a man on a gurney who had been watching her. He had been brought in with the first wave, a man in his late 50s with graying temples and eyes that held a startling, intelligent clarity, despite the pain. He wore the remnants of a high-quality suit, now shredded and blood-stained. A deep gash on his forehead was weeping blood, and his left arm was in a makeshift sling, clearly broken. His detail had surrounded him, men in suits with earpieces, creating a human shield of silence and authority. Finch had glanced at him, declared him a yellow tag, stable but needing attention, and moved on to more visibly critical patients. But the man's eyes were not on his own injury. They were locked on Ilara. He had seen everything. He had seen her defy Finch. He had seen her take control. He had seen her save the boy. And he had seen the knot. His eyes, sharp and analytical, narrowed slightly. A flicker of disbelief, then recognition. It was the look of a man seeing a ghost. He had seen that knot before, tied by the hands of medics who had saved his own men in the desolate mountains of Afghanistan and the dusty streets of Iraq. It was the calling card of the best of the best. And he had just seen it, tied by a rookie nurse in a civilian ER. Ilara held his gaze for a barest second. There was no acknowledgement in her expression, just a cold, blank wall. Her focus was already shifting. She saw a woman choking on her own blood, her airway compromised. She moved toward her. She was no longer Nurse Vance, the timid subordinate. She was a force of nature, a whirlwind of competence in the heart of the storm. She intubated the choking woman with a skill that left a nearby attending physician staring in slack-jawed astonishment. She diagnosed a tension pneumothorax in a man everyone thought was having a heart attack and guided a resident through the needle decompression procedure with terse, clear commands. 3-inch needle, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, right here. Push. You'll feel a pop and hear a hiss of air. Do it. The resident, sweating and terrified, did as he was told. The hiss of air came, and the man's vitals began to stabilize on the monitor. The resident looked at Alara as if she were a god. She was creating a pocket of order in the chaos. Other nurses, and even some doctors, recognizing her preternatural calm and skill, began to gravitate toward her, following her lead without question. She was directing traffic, issuing orders, and saving lives, all while Dr. Alistair Finch was on the other side of the ER, basking in the perceived glory of his own command. But such a disruption of the natural order could not go unnoticed for long. Finch, having finally stabilized a patient in Trauma 1, strode out into the main ER, ready to assert his dominance once more. What he saw stopped him cold. He saw Alara Vance, the meek, useless nurse he had relegated to paperwork, at the center of it all. He saw her directing 2 nurses, a resident, and a physician's assistant. He saw her commanding respect. He saw his own authority being completely and utterly usurped. Rage, pure and undiluted, flooded his senses. This was his stage, his crisis, his victory. And this nobody, this insignificant little nurse, was stealing his spotlight. He stalked across the ER floor, his face a thundercloud. The staff saw him coming and melted away from Alara, a sudden vacuum of space forming around her. They knew what was coming. Alara was checking the boys', Leo's, vitals again, her hand resting on his uninjured leg to comfort him. She was murmuring to him, her voice low, when Finch's shadow fell over them. "What in God's name do you think you are doing?" he snarled, his voice low and shaking with fury. Alara straightened up slowly, turning to face him. Her scrubs were stained with blood. Her face was grim, her eyes holding a cold fire he had never seen before. She was no longer the timid mouse. She was a wolf. "Saving lives, doctor," she said, her voice even. "I gave you an order," he hissed, jabbing a finger toward her. "You were to be on intake. You were not to touch a patient. You have endangered lives with your insubordination." "The boy was dying," she said, her voice flat. "He was bleeding out in the hallway. You tagged him yellow." It was not an accusation. It was a simple statement of fact, and it was more damning than any shout. Finch's face went from red to purple. He was losing control, and he knew it. He was being challenged in front of his entire staff. He had to crush this. He had to make an example of her. "You are a rookie nurse playing doctor," he spat. "You have no idea what you're doing. You are a liability and a menace." He took a deep breath, puffing up his chest. He raised his voice for all to hear. "As of this moment, Alara Vance, you are fired. Get your things and get out of my hospital. Security," he bellowed. "Escort this woman from the premises immediately." A shocked silence fell over the ER. Even the cries of the injured seemed to dim. To fire a nurse in the middle of a mass casualty event was unthinkable. It was a total breakdown of protocol and decency. Alara did not flinch. She simply stared at him, her expression unreadable. She had faced down men with guns and bombs. A petty tyrant in a white coat was nothing. But a cold knot of despair tightened in her stomach. Her new life, her sanctuary, was over. 2 hospital security guards started to move toward her, hesitantly, their expressions apologetic. They were just following orders. And then, a voice cut through the silence. It was not loud, but it carried an undeniable weight, a tone of absolute ingrained command that made Finch's bellowing sound like the yapping of a small dog. "She's not going anywhere." Every head turned. The voice had come from the gurney in the corner, from the man with the graying temples and the broken arm. The man Finch had dismissed as a yellow tag. General Marcus Thorne sat up straighter, his clear, intelligent eyes fixed on Dr. Finch. The men in suits surrounding him tensed, their hands moving instinctively inside their jackets. Finch stared, momentarily confused. "I beg your pardon? This is a staff matter, sir. It does not concern you." "It concerns me now," Thorne said, his voice as calm and sharp as a razor. He looked past Finch, his eyes locking with Alara's. He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was a nod of confirmation, a nod that said, "I see you, Spectre." He then turned his piercing gaze back to the surgeon. "This woman just saved that boy's life, with a field-expedient arterial clamp that your own attending physician missed. She triaged and stabilized at least 3 other critical patients that your team overlooked. She is the most competent person in this room, and you are trying to fire her for it." Finch was flabbergasted. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. "She is a junior nurse. She disobeyed a direct order. I am the chief of surgery here, and I will not have my authority questioned by a patient." Thorne's expression did not change. It did not need to. The sheer force of his presence was enough. "Your authority is predicated on competence, Doctor. Competence you have proven you sorely lack." He gestured with his good hand to his own body. "You tagged me as stable, with a grade 3 concussion, 2 fractured ribs, and a compound fracture of the humerus. Your gross negligence could have cost me my life had I not been conscious enough to self-diagnose." A collective gasp went through the room. Finch's face went white. He had not even properly examined the man. He had glanced at him and moved on. Thorne continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming even more dangerous. "The attack on my convoy was an attempt to stop me from reaching my destination. It seems you are attempting to finish the job through sheer incompetence." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I am General Marcus Thorne, United States Army, and I am formally commandeering this nurse for my medical care." He looked directly at Alara. "Nurse Vance, you're with me now." It was not a request. It was an order. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted. It had been shattered and rebuilt in a matter of seconds. Dr. Alistair Finch, the king of St. Jude's, was suddenly a footnote. The security guards froze, looking from Finch to Thorne, their instincts telling them exactly who was truly in charge. The entire ER staff was staring, their minds reeling. Alara felt a dizzying mix of emotions. The cold despair of her exposed past, the vindication of her skills being recognized, and the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. She had been found. The ghost was no longer a ghost. She looked at General Thorne. She saw in his eyes not just a commander, but a man who understood the world she came from, a world where results were all that mattered. She gave him a single, sharp nod, the same nod a soldier gives a superior officer. Without another glance at the sputtering, apoplectic Dr. Finch, she walked across the floor and stood by General Thorne's gurney. Her posture was different now. The slump of the meek nurse was gone. She stood tall, her shoulders back, a silent sentinel. Finch finally found his voice, a strangled, incredulous squawk. "This is absurd. This is a civilian hospital. You have no authority here. I will have you both removed." Thorne ignored him completely. He spoke to one of his men. "Captain, get the Secretary of Defense on the line. Inform him that the situation is contained and that I have acquired a critical asset. And find me a secure room in this hospital. This nurse and I have things to discuss." "Yes, sir," the captain said, already pulling out a satellite phone that looked wholly out of place in the ER. The general then looked at Alara, his gaze softening for a fraction of a second. "It's been a long time, Spectre." The name, her old call sign, hit her like a physical blow. Hearing it spoken aloud in this place, in this new life was surreal. The concrete over her past had been bulldozed away. "General," she replied, her voice quiet. It was all she could manage. The world of shadows and steel had found her, and it was demanding her back. Within minutes, the landscape of St. Jude's had been redrawn. General Thorne's security detail, with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine, had secured a private suite on the top floor, a wing normally reserved for wealthy donors. Hospital administrators, who had appeared as if summoned from the ether by the mention of the Secretary of Defense, were falling over themselves to accommodate every request. Dr. Finch had vanished. One moment he was standing in the middle of the ER, his face a mask of impotent fury. The next, he was gone, presumably to his office to rage in private or make frantic calls to his lawyers. His authority had evaporated so completely, it was as if it had never existed. Alara moved alongside Thorne's gurney as they wheeled him toward the elevators, a silent member of his protective bubble. The other nurses and doctors watched her go, their expressions a mixture of awe, confusion, and fear. She had been one of them, and now she was something else entirely. She could feel their stares like a brand on her skin. Once inside the private suite, the atmosphere changed. The chaos of the ER was replaced by a tense, quiet professionalism. Thorne's men swept the room for listening devices, their movements economical and precise. A communications hub was set up in the adjoining room. This was not a hospital room anymore. It was a forward operating base. A military doctor, a colonel who had been part of Thorne's entourage in a follow-up vehicle, arrived and began to work on the general's injuries. Alara stood back, observing, her role momentarily unclear. She was an asset, but an asset for what? After the doctor had set and cast Thorne's arm and stitched the gash on his forehead, he gave him a mild sedative for the pain. "You need to rest, General. You've got a concussion. The next 12 hours are critical." Thorne waved him off. "I'll rest when I'm dead, Colonel. Leave us." He gestured toward Alara. "I need a word with the nurse." The colonel looked at Alara, his curiosity piqued, but he knew better than to argue. He nodded. "As you say, sir." He and the rest of the security detail cleared the room, leaving Alara alone with the general. The door clicked shut behind them. The silence in the room was heavy. Thorne shifted on the bed, wincing as he propped himself up against the pillows. He studied her, his gaze intense. "The Ranger knot," he said, his voice quiet. "Haven't seen one of those tied in person since a medic named Doc Riley saved 3 of my guys outside of Kandahar. He used his teeth to tighten it because he'd lost a hand. You tie it just like he did." Alara remained silent, her hands clasped behind her back in a parade rest stance she wasn't even aware she had assumed. "There are only a handful of medics trained to that level," Thorne continued. "Fewer still with your efficiency under pressure. I looked for your file when I heard you'd been discharged. It was sealed, top level. Then you disappeared." "We thought you were dead." "I wanted to be," she said, her voice barely a whisper. It was the most honest thing she had said in years. Thorne nodded slowly, his expression softening with something that looked like understanding. "I read the after-action report from the Zargon incident. What you did, pulling 5 men out of that collapsed structure under active fire. The commendation for the Distinguished Service Cross was approved. It's sitting in a drawer in the Pentagon, waiting for a ghost to come and claim it." The Zargon incident. The memory was a scar on her soul. The dust, the screams, the weight of the man who had died in her arms as she tried to shield him from a secondary explosion. The reason she had left. The reason she had buried Spectre and become Nurse Vance. "I'm not that person anymore, General," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "I'm a civilian. I just want to do my job." "Your job?" Thorne gave a short, humorless laugh. Your job is being wasted here. You're a scalpel being used as a butter knife. And you work for a pompous, incompetent fool who would have let that child die." His expression hardened again. "This wasn't a random attack, Vance. It was a targeted hit. We have intelligence that there's a leak in my command structure. The IED was sophisticated, military grade, but with foreign components. The people who want me dead are well-funded and well-informed. They knew my route. They knew my schedule." He leaned forward, his eyes boring into her. "But they made a mistake. They hit the convoy, but they didn't finish the job. Now I'm stuck in this hospital, a sitting duck. I can't trust the local authorities because we don't know how deep the rot goes. And now, I can't even trust the chief of surgery at this hospital not to kill me with his ego." Alara's mind was racing, connecting dots she hadn't even realized were there. The attack, Thorne's presence, Finch's bizarre and extreme reaction to her competence. If you were Alara, would you have walked away right then, reclaimed your quiet life? Or would you risk everything and step back into the world you tried so desperately to escape? "What do you want from me, sir?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "I need your eyes," Thorne said. "I need your instincts. You see things other people don't. You see threats where they see scenery. For the next 24 hours, you're not a nurse. You're my personal security and medical officer. Your job is to keep me alive. And your first task," he added, his voice dropping, "is to find out everything you can about Dr. Alistair Finch." The order settled over her, heavy and familiar. It was a mission, and her body, her mind, her very soul knew how to execute a mission. The quiet, peaceful life she had tried to build was a sandcastle against an incoming tide. "I'll need access," she said, her voice shifting, becoming the voice of Spectre. Clipped, precise, professional. His office, his computer, hospital personnel files. A slow smile spread across Thorne's face. "My team can get you whatever you need. Just point them in the right direction." He sank back into the pillows, a wave of exhaustion finally hitting him. "Welcome back to the fold, Spectre." Alara left the general's suite and found his captain waiting for her in the hallway. He was a man in his 30s with the quiet intensity of a career operator. "Ma'am," he said, his use of the term both respectful and a clear acknowledgement of her new, undefined rank in this ad hoc unit. "The general said you'd have instructions. I need a hospital schematic, a staff directory, and access to the security camera network. Priority is Dr. Finch's office and the surgical supply records for the last 12 months, she said, the words flowing easily, the mission parameters defining themselves in her mind. The captain didn't question it. He simply tapped on a ruggedized tablet he was holding. "Schematics and directory are coming to your new phone now," he said, holding out a sleek, black, anonymized device. "Security network will take a few more minutes. We're persuading the hospital's IT director. As for the office, what kind of access do you need?" "Dark and quiet," she replied. He nodded. "We can arrange that." The transformation was complete. The blue scrubs felt like a costume now. Beneath them, Ilara was all angles and purpose. She moved through the hospital's hushed late-night corridors not as a nurse, but as an infiltrator. Two of Thorne's men, dressed down as maintenance workers, accompanied her, their presence a silent promise of force if needed. They reached the executive wing. The name on the door was etched in a brass plate. Dr. Alistair Finch, M.D., F.A.C.S., Chief of Surgery. One of Thorne's men produced a small, complex set of tools. The lock on the expensive oak door clicked open in under 10 seconds. They slipped inside. The office was exactly as she'd imagined. Opulent, self-important. A massive mahogany desk dominated the room. The walls were covered with framed diplomas, awards, and photos of Finch shaking hands with smiling politicians and local celebrities. It was a shrine to his own ego. "You have 10 minutes," the captain's voice murmured in the small earpiece they had given her. "We'll keep watch." Alara didn't waste a second. She ignored the desk drawers. Too obvious. She scanned the room, her eyes taking in every detail. The bookshelf, filled with leather-bound medical texts. The small, private washroom. The antique globe on a stand in the corner. Her instincts led her to the bookshelf. Most of the books were for show, their spines unbroken. But one, a thick volume on cardiothoracic surgery, looked slightly more worn than the others. She pulled it out. It was lighter than it should have been. It was hollow. Inside was not a secret ledger or a weapon, but a small silver flash drive. She pocketed it. Too easy. A decoy? Probably. She moved to the desk. The computer was password protected, but the captain had already told her a tech specialist was slicing into it remotely. She focused on the physical space. She ran a gloved hand under the lip of the desk. Her fingers brushed against a small, magnetic lockbox. She pried it loose. Inside was another flash drive, this one black and unmarked. This felt more promising. 5 minutes, her earpiece buzzed. She went to the private washroom. She checked the medicine cabinet, the area behind the toilet. Nothing. But the air smelled faintly of a chemical that didn't belong. A solvent. She looked at the wall mirror. It was mounted flush, but on one side she saw a tiny, almost invisible scratch near the frame, as if something had been used to pry it open. She used a thin metal probe from her own small hidden kit, a relic of her past she never went anywhere without, and worked it into the seam. The mirror swung open on silent hinges, revealing a small wall safe. "Bingo," she whispered. "Can you open it?" the captain asked. "Not without a lot of noise," she replied. She took a photo of the safe's keypad and manufacturer plate with her new phone and sent it to him. "Can your people identify it? Find a default code or a bypass?" "Working on it." She left the safe and did one last sweep of the office. Her eyes landed on the wastebasket. It was full of shredded paper. Finch was arrogant, but not stupid. He'd shredded anything incriminating. But shredders had patterns. 2 minutes. She carefully removed the bag of shredded paper. This was a long shot, but long shots were her specialty. "I'm done here," she said. "Exfil." They slipped out of the office as silently as they had entered, the door clicking shut behind them. Back in the ad hoc command center next to Thorne's room, the energy was electric. Alara handed the flash drives and the bag of shredded paper to the captain. "Get your tech to work on these," she said, pointing to the drives. "The silver one is probably a decoy with dummy files. The black one is the real prize. And this," she said, holding up the bag, "needs to be pieced together, digitally. Scan every strip and have a program reassemble it." The captain looked at the bag of confetti-like paper, then back at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "That could take days." "You have hours," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. She walked into Thorne's room. He was awake, the sedative having worn off. He looked at her, a question in his eyes. "He's hiding something," she said. "He has a hidden safe and he's shredding documents. He's running scared." "But what is he hiding?" Thorne mused. "What does a surgeon have to hide that would connect to an assassination attempt?" "Surgical supplies," Alara said, the pieces clicking into place in her mind. "I asked for the records. That's where the money is in a hospital this size. Kickbacks, substandard materials. If you wanted to hurt someone on the operating table, that's how you do it." Just then, the captain entered the room, his face grim. He held up his tablet. "Ma'am, our tech just broke the encryption on the black flash drive. It's not financial records. It's a communications log." He turned the tablet so Thorne and Alara could see. It was a series of encrypted messages between an anonymous user and a handler. The dates stretched back 6 months. The messages detail a schedule of kickback payments from a medical supply company called Innovamed, the captain explained. In exchange for Finch ensuring their products were exclusively used at St. Jude's. Substandard products? Thorne asked. The worst, the captain confirmed. We cross-referenced the company. They're a shell corporation, flagged by DHS for selling cheap, foreign-made knockoffs of high-grade surgical equipment. Their steel implants have a 40% failure rate. Their sutures dissolve prematurely. People have died because of this. Ilara felt a cold fury settle in her stomach. Finch wasn't just arrogant. He was a murderer, trading lives for money. There's more, the captain said, his voice tense. The last message. It was sent 2 days ago. He highlighted it on the screen. The message was simple and chilling. Asset T will be routed to your facility on the 15th. High profile. Ensure he does not leave. A bonus will be provided for a surgical complication. Asset T. Thorne. The 15th. Today. The bomb on the highway was just phase 1. The plan was never to kill him in the blast. It was to injure him, to deliver him to St. Jude's, where Dr. Finch could finish the job on the operating table. A death that could be explained away as a tragic but understandable outcome of his injuries. Son of a bitch, Thorne whispered, his face as hard as granite. He was going to kill me. Ilara's mind flashed back to the ER, to Finch dismissing the general's injuries, tagging him yellow, keeping him away from the top-tier care in the trauma bays. It wasn't just negligence. It was a deliberate attempt to let his condition worsen, to create a pretext for a risky, unnecessary surgery. A surgery he would not survive. He knows we're onto him, Ilara said, her voice urgent. He shredded documents. He's going to run. No, Thorne said, a dangerous glint in his eye. He's not going to run. He's too arrogant. He thinks he's untouchable. He's going to try to destroy the evidence, the physical evidence. The surgical supplies, Ilara realized aloud. The Innovamed products. If he can replace them with legitimate stock, it's his word against a flash drive he can claim was planted. Where are they stored? Thorne asked. Central Sterile Supply, Ilara answered immediately. Basement level. It's a secure area. Get your team down there now, Thorne commanded his captain. Lock it down. Nobody in or out. He then looked at Ilara. And we need to get Finch out of his office and into a place where we can corner him. A plan began to form in Ilara's mind, cold and precise. A trap. We leak a rumor, she said. Let him think one of your men is heading down to Sterile Supply to do an inventory audit. He'll panic. He'll go down there himself to try and intercept them or get rid of the evidence before they arrive. And we'll be waiting for him, Thorne finished, a grim smile on his face. Captain, make it happen. Use one of the hospital staff you can trust. Let them make a call that Finch can overhear. What about the safe? The captain asked. Forget the safe for now, Thorne said. The real evidence is in that supply room. Let's go catch ourselves a traitor. The sterile supply room in the basement of St. Jude's was a cold, cavernous space filled with floor-to-ceiling metal shelves. The air smelled of ozone from the autoclaves and antiseptic solutions. It was the hospital's sterile heart, and tonight, it was a trap. Ilara stood in the shadows behind a towering rack of surgical kits, her heart a slow, steady drum in her chest. This was familiar territory. The waiting, the silence before the strike. 2 of Thorne's men were positioned at the other end of the room, hidden and silent. The captain was monitoring from the security room, watching the cameras. They had set the bait perfectly. A trusted night shift supervisor had made a loud, seemingly frantic call on a recorded line about a sudden, unexpected audit of the surgical implant inventory ordered by the General's people. The call was made from a station just outside Finch's office. Now, they waited to see if the fish would bite. For 20 minutes, there was nothing but the hum of the ventilation system. Alara remained perfectly still, a statue carved from shadow. She controlled her breathing, slowed her heart rate, and expanded her senses. She listened. Then she heard it. The soft electronic beep of the keypad at the main door, followed by the hiss of the door opening. Footsteps. Hurried. Anxious. Dr. Alistair Finch stepped into the room. He was out of his expensive suit, now wearing simple black scrubs, as if trying to blend in. His face was pale, his eyes darting around nervously. He was carrying a large, empty duffel bag. He thought he was alone. He moved quickly, his arrogance replaced by a raw, desperate fear. He went straight to a locked cage at the back of the room, the storage for high-value orthopedic implants. He fumbled with the key, his hands shaking. He unlocked the cage and hurried inside. Alara could hear him muttering to himself, his voice a frantic whisper. All of it. Have to get all of it. Replace it. He began pulling boxes off the shelves, his movements clumsy. The boxes were labeled Innovamed. He started stuffing them into his duffel bag, the cheap cardboard tearing. Alara waited. She let him feel safe. She let him believe he was going to get away with it. The best traps were the ones the target never saw until it was too late. Finch had the bag nearly full. He was sweating profusely, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He was just a man, stripped of his power and prestige, revealed as a common thief and a killer. Looking for something, Doctor? Alara's voice, calm and quiet, cut through the silence. Finch froze. He dropped a box which hit the concrete floor with a loud crack. He spun around, his eyes wide with terror. He saw her step out from behind the shelves, a silhouette against the harsh fluorescent lights. You, he breathed, his face a mess of confusion and fear. The nurse. It's over, Finch, she said. His fear curdled into cornered animal rage. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I will destroy you. I will end your career. What career? Alara asked, taking a slow step forward. The one you tried to end this afternoon? Or the one before that? From the other end of the room, Thorne's two men emerged from the shadows, their weapons held in a low, ready position. They were not pointing them at Finch, but their presence was an undeniable wall of force. Finch's eyes darted between them, looking for an escape. There was none. His gaze fell on a heavy metal cart loaded with saline bags. In a final, desperate act, he shoved it with all his might, sending it careening toward Alara. It was a foolish, panicked move. Alara didn't even seem to flinch. She sidestepped the cart with a fluid, economical movement, letting it crash harmlessly into the shelves behind her. As Finch tried to bolt for the door, she closed the distance in 2 quick strides. She didn't use a complex martial art. She didn't throw a punch. She simply moved into his path, grabbed the front of his scrubs with one hand, and used his own forward momentum to run him straight into a concrete support pillar. The impact was solid. The air rushed out of Finch's lungs with a loud woof. He slumped to the ground, dazed and gasping, the fight completely gone out of him. The main door to the supply room hissed open again. General Thorne walked in, his arm in a sling, but his posture ramrod straight. He was flanked by the hospital's CEO and the chief of security, both of whom looked pale and terrified. Thorne looked down at the pathetic figure of Alistair Finch, crumpled on the floor amidst the evidence of his crimes. He then looked at Alara, who stood over him, not even breathing hard. "Well done, nurse," he said, the corner of his mouth twitching in a smile. He turned his gaze to the hospital officials. Gentlemen, I believe you have a personnel issue to resolve. And I suspect the police will be very interested in the contents of that bag. The downfall was swift and total. Dr. Alistair Finch was arrested on the spot. The evidence was irrefutable. The substandard supplies, the encrypted messages, and the fact that he was caught, red-handed, trying to destroy it all. The story hit the news within hours, a spectacular fall from grace for the celebrated surgeon. The deeper conspiracy he was a part of would be unraveled by Thorne's people in the weeks to come, but his chapter was closed. The next morning, Alara stood in General Thorne's hospital room. He was dressed in a fresh military uniform, preparing to leave. The sun was streaming through the window, and for the first time in a long time, the future did not feel like a threat. "The Secretary of Defense sends his gratitude," Thorne said, adjusting his collar. "And his apologies. He wants to know when you'll be coming to Washington to pick up your medal." Alara shook her head. "I don't need a medal, sir." "No, I suppose you don't," Thorne agreed. He walked over to her, his expression serious. "What you do need is a purpose that's worthy of your skills. This life you tried to build, it was a noble idea. But you can't hide a light like yours under a bushel, Vance. The world has too much darkness." He held out a simple business card. It had nothing on it but a name, his name, and a single, secure phone number. "I'm putting together a new unit," he said. "A rapid response group that operates outside the normal chains of command. We'll be dealing with threats like the one that brought me here. It will require a unique blend of intelligence, medical expertise, and unconventional skills. I need a chief medical officer who can also serve as my lead field operative, someone who can save a life 1 minute and neutralize a threat the next." He looked her straight in the eye. "The job is yours, if you want it. No more hiding. No more pretending to be less than you are. It's a chance to use all of who you are to make a difference." Alara looked at the card in her hand. It was a crossroads. She could try to go back, find another quiet hospital in another anonymous city, and resume her penance. Or she could accept the truth. Spectre wasn't a curse. It was a part of her. A part that had saved a boy's life and stopped a killer. A quiet, exhausted relief washed over her. The war within herself was finally over. She looked up at the general, and for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "When do I start?" We put out these stories every week, and we can only do that thanks to the support of viewers like you. If you want to help keep these narratives of justice and vindication alive, please hit that subscribe button. It makes a bigger difference than you know. And let us know in the comments, have you ever had to stand up to a boss who was abusing their power? We read every single one. Now, don't go anywhere. The next story is loaded up and ready for you on the screen.